Hey guys, it's Angelo, and welcome to my Discipline Priest guide for World of Warcraft's patch 8.0 in Battle for Azeroth. As with all guides which start us out in an expansion, I am very excited to bring this guide to you, as the Discipline Priest has seen some very interesting gameplay changes which maintain most of the Legion playstyle with many quality of life improvements and new interesting choices to make. From a lot of new and interesting talents to Power Word Shield returning to its former, more prominent place in the Disc Priest's toolkit, there are a lot of things to discuss, and I'm sure that all of you will want to know all there is to know. The Discipline Priest in BFA takes a few steps away from its complexity and somewhat clunky playstyle from Legion and replaces it with more logical gameplay mechanics, simpler ways to heal, and a generally more exciting and fun time for the player. Definitely one of the strongest healers currently in Battle for Azeroth, the Discipline Priest now caters towards a broader community of potential players, while not compromising too much on the idea of dealing damage in order to heal. In this guide, we'll be going over the major changes from Legion to BFA, the disc's stat priority, your best talents for various situations, your spell priority and rotation, and the overall pros and cons of the spec. If you want to have a more in-depth look specifically at the Discipline Priest spell priority and rotation, be sure to check out the Disc Priest rotation video displayed on screen now, as well as in the description box below. Now, of course, without any further ado, as I'm sure you guys are eager to know more, let's go right ahead and have a look. Now, as mentioned a little earlier, most changes for the Discipline Priest stem from new talents, old mechanics returning, and a slight simplification of our playstyle. When it comes to the idea behind the spec and how it feels, if you're returning from Legion to Battle for Azeroth, you will essentially not feel any changes. That being said though, our most interesting changes start off with our artifact weapon, Light's Wrath, being completely removed. With this, one of our strongest abilities in Legion has also been removed, which of course is the Light's Wrath ability. It shares the same name. With the removal of our artifact, all artifact traits have also either been removed or have turned into talents themselves. Lenience Reward is a prime example of this, as it was previously an artifact trait and is now found in our level 100 talent row and is simply called Lenience. Sins of the Many has also been turned into a talent from previously being an artifact trait, however with a slight change which we'll discuss in a bit. Apart from that, Plea has been completely removed, not only due to the way it somewhat impaired the playstyle of the Discipline Priest, especially in later parts of Legion, but also of a more important change, or rather because a more important change took place, which would have rendered Plea completely useless anyways, and the change I'm talking about is centered around Power Word Shield. Power Word Shield has kept its ability to apply atonement onto a target when used, but now has no cooldown and of course is an instant cast. This makes Power Word Shield completely replace Plea for one, while also acting as a much stronger and even more important ability than it did before. Through its redesign, the Discipline Priest will have an easier time mitigating the incoming damage while not having to halt the regular rotation just to apply atonement to the group, especially when Power Word Radiance, for example, is on cooldown. This is especially helpful in tight situations, but is also a super tool to prevent very predictable as well as very unpredictable damage. The final change that comes with this Power Word Shield change, of course, then falls onto Rapture. Rapture previously completely removed your cooldown of Power Word Shield for 8 seconds, but as that would now be redundant, Rapture has been changed. It now increases the potency of your Power Word Shield by 200% for the next 10 seconds. Essentially making your Power Word Shield be a smaller rate cooldown for a bit, and this is a great change in my opinion. Good. Now, to summarize, we find ourselves with a healing rotation, or rather priority, that ties greatly into itself now thanks to the Power Word Shield changes, leaving the Discipline Priest with less stress in difficult situations and more fun in the gameplay. So far, so good. Let's go ahead and look at our stats. Our stat priority, compared to Legion, has definitely changed, but the changes are very logical following the gameplay changes and the talent changes. That being said, the Discipline Priest, similar to the Shadow Priest, is a prime candidate of a stat priority that may change later on in the expansion, with more powerful gear and therefore more stats to play around with. Currently, Intellect is vastly superior to the other stats due to the nerf that all secondary stats have received. Right after Intellect, we currently have Haste, which will reduce cast and channel time, reduce global cooldown, and will increase the amounts of ticks or Shadow Word Pain is able to dish out during its uptime. Following Haste, we now have Mastery, which increases the potency of your healing and your absorption effects of any target with your Atonement applied by a percentual amount, as stated previously. Mastery will increase the already strong healing of the Discipline Priest, and this will be especially true in a strong raiding environment where you'll have a lot more targets that have your Atonement applied onto them. Critical Strike is up next on the list, but interestingly enough is very close in terms of competitiveness with Mastery. In a Mythic Plus setting, or any dungeon setting really, Critical Strike is arguably ahead of Mastery due to the fact that only a maximum of 5 people at once will have your Atonement applied to them, and most of your focus will always fall on your tank, making Critical Strike a lot more important. In no way does this make Mastery weak in a dungeon environment, this only makes Critical Strike relatively prominent here. Finally, we have Versatility, which is a flat increase to your healing, your damage, and your survivability. Especially in the early stages of Battle for Azeroth, Versatility will be pretty strong. However, I did rank it lower than Critical Strike, as I have no doubt in my mind that it will drop lower again once higher level raiding gear starts to roll in. Should this not be the case, I'll be sure to make a video covering it, but for now, expect my words to hold themselves true. Stick to this stat priority, and you'll be perfectly fine. Next up, of course, we have our talents, and here we will definitely see some changes. You will see some new talents here, which we'll discuss, and as mentioned before, some artifact traits, like Sins of the Many and of course Lenience, are now also talents. Good. Now, let's check it out. Now, as mentioned before, some old talents have been removed, while new ones have been implemented. The Discipline Priest's typical talent choice in different situations is not as versatile as it could be in my personal opinion, but some things certainly do shift around in a logical, gameplay-influencing manner. In our level 15 talent row, you'll typically want to run with Castigation when raiding, or in lower level Mythic Plus dungeons, while of course Twist of Fate will prove itself especially strong in medium to higher level Mythic Plus dungeons, where any member of your group will frequently drop below 35% health, or rather the 35% health threshold. Schism is pretty good as well, however only in Mythic Plus and only with a very competitive, knowledgeable group of players. Schism is a lot more gameplay engaging than both Penance and Twist of Fate, or rather than Castigation and Twist of Fate, but if mastered, can come in pretty handy. Our level 30 talent row is made up of survivability and utility talents, but here Angelic Feather is the most dominant in any situation. The 3 stacks of movement speed, of which not only you, but any party member can profit from, is pretty strong and definitely wins out against Body and Soul and Masochism. In our level 45 talent row, we find ourselves with 3 pretty competitive talents once more. Shield Discipline will be the strongest in a raid environment, where your shield will constantly grant you mana and is definitely stronger than the other talents if you're truly hurting in terms of mana, as its mana regeneration is potentially higher than that of Mindbender and Power Word Solace. Mindbender, on the other hand, grants a very decent chunk of mana, is very simple to use as it is essentially a self-managing spell and bumps up the damage you deal slightly. If you're not hurting for mana as much anymore, you should swap to Mindbender instead of Shield Discipline, and Power Word Solace, on the other hand, has more potential in Mythic Plus, as here, not only will you want to deal more damage, but you will also have the chance to drink in between most pulls, making mana management take a completely different turn. as Power Word Solace essentially grants you slightly more damage in a dungeon with an extra bump of mana while also pretty much being usable whenever you need it. It's definitely strongest when used in Mythic Plus. In our level 60 talent row, we once more find utility talents. This row is completely up to you. I personally use Psychic Voice, however all 3 talents have their uses. In our level 75 talent row, we have Sins of the Many, Contrition, and Shadow Covenant, the latter being the only talent of this row that is not a new one. Contrition will typically be your go-to talent choice in most situations, be it Mythic Plus or raiding. Sins of the Many can be pretty strong, but effectively loses strength the more players you need to heal. This makes it very strong in low-level Mythic keys where you don't have to heal as much, or with a very acquainted, competitive group in higher Mythic Plus keys. For any other situation, Contrition will be your go-to, and on top of that, it's literally a completely passive talent which does not require any of your attention and has no drawbacks at all. Shadow Covenant is currently not an option compared to both Contrition and Sins of the Many, as its drawbacks compared to the benefits it gives the Discipline Priest don't make it overly viable. Our level 90 talent row has 2 very clear-cut talents for specific situations, while the 3rd talent is unfortunately not viable at all. Purge the Wicked is strongest in Mythic Plus environments of any level, as there are less players to heal overall, making Purge the Wicked's effect clear and effective pretty quickly. Halo, on the other hand, is very strong in raids, as there are a lot more players that require healing, and you don't run the risk of pulling extra groups of enemies into a boss fight most of the time, as could be the case when using Halo in Mythic Plus. Both Purge the Wicked and Halo offer a very solid increase to healing, and again, both are very strong in their respective tier. Divine Star tries too hard to be both damage and heal in a single spell, and unfortunately both its heal and its damage are just not competitive enough in comparison to the other talents in its row, especially so because it only scales with 40% of your spell power. To put this into perspective, Halo scales with 110% of your spell power and heals all players in a radius, while also dealing damage rather than in a straight line like, again, Divine Star does. Finally, we have our level 100 talent row, which hasn't necessarily received the most gameplay changing changes out of all the talent rows, but definitely the most diverse. Lenience, previously an artifact trait called Lenience Reward, is now a talent, reduces the damage that any target with your atonement applied to takes by 3%, and of course this is incredibly strong in any situation, be it Mythic Plus or raiding. In most scenarios, you should definitely take Lenience, as its flat damage reduction is just too powerful really to ignore. In raid environments, where your raid will typically not be grouped up, Luminous Barrier can be pretty strong, but this will be based on a case-to-case situation, so be sure to discuss this with your raid leader or fellow healers. Evangelism is actually really strong in raid settings as well, and if you're confident that the other healers in your raid will have no problem with doing their job, the extended duration on your atonement will not only make the boss fight a lot less stressful for you, it will also save you a ton of mana in the long run. In the early stages of raiding, especially when bosses are still difficult and time-consuming, Evangelism will most likely be the talent you will pick due to the aforementioned benefits, but once progression settles down, Lenience will bump itself up again. Good. Now that we have our talents squared away, let's take a deep breath and jump right into the final stages of this guide, namely our spell priorities and, in the Discipline Priest's case, the healing rotation. In comparison to Legion, we won't see any major gameplay changes, but the simplification of our playstyle through the changes to Power Word Shield especially does bring some important factors along with it. Now, before we start, please keep in mind that a healer's spell priority highly depends on the circumstances. This list should not serve as your 10 commandments for the Discipline Priest, but instead should be your guideline through different situations. If you want a detailed, step-by-step explanation of when to use specific cooldowns, how to prepare a raid for a lot of incoming damage, or how to heal mana efficiently without sacrificing your output, be sure to check out my Discipline Priest rotation video, where I go into detail with all of these topics even further. But that being said, the Discipline Priest's goal to being successful at healing is to deal a lot of damage, while maintaining different active abilities on your allies. As you probably already know when watching this guide at this point, dealing damage for the Discipline Priest essentially boils down to 4 spells, talents not included: Shadow Word Pain, Smite, Penance, and Holy Nova. What should help you tremendously is if you don't view your damaging abilities as, well, damaging abilities, but much more as your healing abilities. Whenever you apply Atonement to a target, which in turn is done by using Power Word Shield, Shadow Mend, or Power Word Radiance, your damaging abilities heal those affected targets for 60% of the damage dealt, and this healing effect of course increases with Mastery. What this boils down to is that you will want to try and spread your Atonement and then just deal damage. For single target healing, Power Word Shield is your strongest Atonement applying spell, especially on tanks and especially in Mythic Plus. Power Word Radiance is very important in a raiding environment, but also incredibly effective in Mythic Plus, especially when you expect your entire group to be taking damage and need to respond to that incoming damage quickly. Shadow Mend serves as the emergency button when no other spells which heal a lot are currently off of cooldown, for example Penance, or if a group member needs to simultaneously be healed as well as receive Atonement, or rather receive Atonement, in order to benefit from the damage you deal. A well-constructed balance of your Atonement applying effects is important, and you should try and maintain your Atonement on as many targets as possible whenever you're expecting damage to come in. The key here though is to apply your Atonement preemptively, meaning you want to try and spread it before the damage has happened, if possible. This is important because the Discipline Priest is not so much a responsive healer as it is a proactive healer. Specs like the Holy Priest, the Restoration Druid, or the Mistweaver Monk are great candidates to deal with damage that has already happened and needs to be healed away again. Your job, however, as a disc in these cases is to prevent as much damage as possible, and this only works by playing preemptively. Discipline Priests, much more than other healers, need to think one step ahead, and if you do so, this will tremendously help you. This also holds true to the way you spread your damage onto enemies during combat. When you don't expect a lot of damage to come in anytime soon, or when there is not a lot of incoming damage to counter currently, then Shadow Word Pain, or Purge the Wicked if spec'd, can be limited to as many enemies as you see fit. When there is a lot of incoming damage, or for example, when a raid boss or a dungeon boss is getting ready to use a group damaging ability, you'll want to spread your dot onto as many targets as possible preemptively, while also having your targets atoned. The same holds true for Penance, especially when you use the talent Contrition, which heals every atoned target when you heal with Penance. And to top things off, the same ideology of damage prevention needs to be applied to your defensive cooldowns. Rapture and Pain Suppression, that is. Rapture, as stated earlier in this video, now increases the absorption effect of your Power Word Shield by 200%. Especially in situations where either a lot of tank damage or a lot of group damage will be coming in, you should prepare your group by using Rapture and spreading Power Word Shield onto your group members. Pain Suppression should always be used right before either a tank will receive a very hard hit from an enemy, or whenever group members need to soak an ability that could potentially kill them. Don't be afraid to throw out your Pain Suppression as you see fit, as a wasted cooldown means a lot less trouble than a dead group member most of the time. Alright, after covering all of this information surrounding the Discipline Priest, you're equipped with the knowledge needed to be a promising and hopefully skillful player of the spec in battle for Azeroth. Currently, I personally am very satisfied with the way the Discipline Priest plays itself. The simplification of our playstyle through the removal of Plea and the more prominent role of Power Word Shield could arguably be the best change Blizzard has made to any healing spec, as that change alone has pushed the Priest to be a lot more fun than previously. This, paired with very cool and very strong new talents, and overall very fluid gameplay, should enable the Disc Priest to become a very popular spec among many players in Battle for Azeroth. But of course, what do you guys think? Are you enjoying the Discipline Priest? Are there things you dislike about our changes, our current playstyle, or perhaps about the class in general? Be sure to share your insights with me, or with all of us even over at our Discord. I'll leave the link of course in the description below, and once you're there, you can share insights and ideas with other players, be in direct contact with me, and perhaps be so lucky and be picked to be in the credits of the next video. Now, as always, thank you very much for watching, and thank you so much for your continuous support. If you liked this video, please leave a like as it goes a long way, and if you'd like to see more of my content in the future, feel free to subscribe. A special thanks to all of the patrons from Patreon who help out a lot every month, and a special thanks to all of the people on our Discord channel who've been helping out new and returning players a lot lately. I personally cannot thank you all enough. Have a good one, my friends, enjoy your journey in Battle for Azeroth, and I will see you all in the next one.